So welcome to the last topic of this semester connected to human rights. I am talking about working conditions, and more specifically, today you will discover what we mean by modern-day slavery. As a reminder, in class last week we talked about the economic divide, so the separation based on how much money you make, and the fact that to fight this problem, we need to have access to credit, and we introduced Kiva. Last week in class we had the hunger banquet, and as you know we've been talking about human rights this semester. So this week we'd like to introduce one more organization called Oxfam. It is a great NPO that actually created the hunger banquet, and it also fights for human rights. And today you will see that we are focusing on modern-day slavery. Yes, slavery was abolished a while back, but nowadays there are still forms of slavery, and this week we will talk about slavery connected to work. The first Oxfam was founded in 1942. Before I give you the answer, I'd like you to think about what was happening in the world at around this time, 1942. Well, the answer is World War II. It started in 1939 and it finished in 1945, at least in Europe. So during World War II, people in Oxford, which is a town in England, learned that civilians mean people who are not in the military, so people like you and I. So they learned that civilians in Greece were starving. They were not having enough food. The reason is the British Navy was not allowing food to get through. The British Navy was stopping food from coming into Greece, so that women and children in Greece were suffering from famine, a lack of food. And some of them were even dying of starvation, which is when you haven't had food for a very long time, your body starts dying slowly but surely. The British people campaigned, and their goal was that the British Navy would allow food to get to the starving people. After all, during a war, civilians shouldn't be the target, right? So they had Oxford Famine Relief, and this is where you can see the origin of the word Oxford, famine. So the British people were trying to improve the situation in Greece connected to food. Now Oxfam is international and it works in 94 countries, and it is considered one of the leading, so one of the main organizations in emergency relief. Emergency relief means when there is a catastrophe, it could be a natural disaster, it could be a war, as we just saw, they quickly provide help, right? So emergency relief. And so every year, in Oxfam International responds to about 40 emergencies. Right? So it's just think about it in terms of a year, it's more than 3 times a month. And they provide food, water, shelter, meaning a place where people can stay, hopefully safely and away from the rain, the heat, or the cold, as well as emergency supplies. Most of the time, things like blanket, light, and clothing. Oxfam International also works to fight poverty and injustice. Injustice means something that is not fair. And I think you will agree with me that modern-day slavery is not fair and it leads to poverty. So topics that we have been talking about in this course. To help you discover what Oxfam does in terms of campaigns, I'd like you to read the article about flowers and the article about fruit picking. These 2 articles or stories are on your worksheet. while you're reading, please keep in mind that the goal is to see what is unfair and or doesn't respect human rights, right? So highlight information in the stories, take notes, so that you can explain in class your point of view using your own words, not just what is written in the article. So, what is unfair and how can you explain this? I hope you now better understand what we mean by modern-day slavery with the situation in Colombia and Chile. I want to point out that this is not just happening in developing countries, but in Japan too. We are using a CNN video of 2010 explaining the situation of human rights in Japan. So please read the guiding questions on your worksheet, then watch the video and answer these questions. Hopefully you could understand the most important information from the video, and I would like to give you some update on the human rights issues in Japan. I am using an article from the Japan Times of 2013, and it is called "Foreign Trainees Still Falling Prey to Japanese Employers." You can find the link to the article at the end of the video. Basically, the article explains that these training programs are supported by the Japanese government. Because of the support by the Japanese government, the foreign trainees, which they really are not trainees, they're just being abused, and in a way are treated as slaves. Because the Japanese government supports these programs, the trainees are not afraid to come. But in reality, when they arrive in Japan, they have no contract, they have no monthly wages. They only get paid if they work overtime. This is the definition of forced labor. The Japan Times article explains that Japanese companies use cheap labor from outside of Japan because of the shrinking Japanese force. Shrinking Japanese force means that there are less and less Japanese people who can work. One of the solutions would be to change the training program into working visa. But according to the Japan Times, many people are against opening the country to immigration. Many people don't want non-Japanese to come and work in Japan. These last two pieces of information are connected to the last task for this week. Please choose one of the two and write out your opinion so that you can discuss in class. The questions are on your worksheet. This is the end of the flipped activities for this week. Thank you very much. The next slide will show the references.